Okay, so the point at which everything shuts down in an anti-natalist argument is when everybody realizes there's going to be human extinction. I think anti-natalists understand this. They've accepted it. They understand what it means. They've emotionally accepted it. Because when I was going through, discovering anti-natalism, there were a few emotions that would bubble up whenever I thought about human extinction. I would feel very uncomfortable with it. I would feel very saddened by it. Even though the arguments were making a lot of logical sense and really getting into my head, I would still feel this sadness. And I knew I had to grapple with it and come to terms with it because it's what the truth is, right? Emotions don't really dictate truth or what should and shouldn't happen. They dictate what you feel, and that's as far as it goes. I guess you could expand that a bit, and you might not want to hurt somebody's feelings, so you don't do certain things. But I mean, in terms of policy and the fate of the human race, we base all these decisions on evidence and science and the best way we know how to figure out the world around us, right? That's what government tries to do. It's what scientists try to do. It's what's driving the climate change arguments on both sides, right? Like, I mean, people against climate change argue against climate action because the science says this and this and this, whereas people on the other side who are pro climate change policy, they say this and this and this because of the science, right? So our most trusted institutions, government, democracy, all of it is based on evidence and on fact, just the facts, right? So we need to understand these things from a factual standpoint, and antinatalism is no different. So, like I said, there were some emotions bubbling up in me, and so I totally empathize. I totally get what people mean when they say, well, it gets to a point where you realize there's human extinction that's imminent, and it just really makes me feel awful and depressed and sad. I get it, but you have to understand what's at stake. What we're trying to do, and what antinatalists are trying to do, is end human suffering, and that is like the mother lode of emotion, right? Human suffering is where it all, it really does span the spectrum, right? Human suffering has caused so much destruction, and in and of itself, it is destruction. At times, we can feel happy. I'm not ignoring that human beings can feel happy. I'm not ignoring that collectively human beings can prosper and be happier together. There can be an aggregate of happiness in the world if conditions are right and all that stuff. But suffering is really core to a human being. It's core to our consciousness, right? It's how we're conscious. We suffer. It is like something to suffer, to feel that suffering, right? We don't learn. We don't learn very simple things or very complicated things without understanding feedback, right? The way certain things make us feel and the way we're aware of those feelings. Like we do, and that's from a human perspective. I still do understand, the need for science and all that stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to contradict myself, but it is important that we feel and that we understand things, right? That being said, if I didn't contradict I don't want to go over it again, but I'm not contradicting myself there. I'm saying science is it's more important than the individual feeling of someone, right? It's better to figure out the world through science and fact, as opposed to being an emotional kind of vehicle, just madly taking twists and turns or throughout life. There has to be some sort of evidence-based understanding of the world. There has to be, it's how we've prospered in the last since 200,000 years ago. We've gotten better at understanding science and fact and policy and things like that, right? Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. So there's this feminist. Her name is Emma Goldman, and some of you might know her, but she lives at this interesting intersection between antinatalism and feminism and capitalism and anarchism. So she's an interesting character. I haven't read too much about her, but I did see her quote, or this quote that I'm going to read, on an antinatalist website. And they were using the quote as a promotion of antinatalist thought, because you'll hear the quote and it sounds like antinatalism. But yeah, let me just read the quote. So this is from Emma Goldman, and I don't know when she wrote this, but it might have been, yeah, I don't know, but you could look it up. It's from Marriage and Love. But she writes this. She says, "Who would fight wars? Who would create wealth? Who would make the policeman, the jailer, if women were to refuse the indiscriminate breeding of children? The race, shouts the king, the president, the capitalist, the priest. The race must be preserved, though woman be degraded to mere machine. And the marriage institution is our only safety valve against the pernicious sex awakening of woman. But in vain these frantic efforts to maintain a state of bondage. In vain, too, the edicts of the church, the mad attacks of rulers, in vain even the arm of the law. Woman no longer wants to be party to the production of a race of sickly, feeble, decrepit, wretched human beings who have neither the strength nor moral courage to throw off the yoke of poverty and slavery." So you get how that kind of plays into antinatalism, but you kind of have to it's only antinatalist in a kind of slight disposition. Because number one, if you read the full text where that excerpt comes from, you'll see that she's a conditional antinatalist. So she thinks that in scenarios where things were more optimized to have kids, then it would be good to have kids. It's just that this capitalism thing is kind of throwing all of us off, right? It's kind of creating these situations where people are being exploited. People have to work, and money is sort of the center of everything. And, so in that case, it's bad to give birth to people, because, you're creating a race that's maybe dependent too much on consumerism and artificial pleasures, things like that. It's conditional antinatalism, but I'm reading this essay right now. It's conditional antinatalism is not really even a thing. What conditional antinatalism is basically what the essay says is really more accurately called selective pronatalism. So you're still for birth, you're just for less birth, but you still think people should give birth. Just less of it, right? So she's not really an antinatalist, but like I said, if you put it just out of phase just a little bit, you can see how the sickly, feeble, decrepit, wretched human being is going to be around no matter what the political climate is, right? Like, I mean, that's how we've been for the past 200,000 years. If we think there's certain standards of good health, we all fail in that area eventually, right? We all get to the point of, being riddled with cancer or heart disease or whatever else. Like, I mean, we all fall victim to bad health, all of us. Like, it's coming, right? Anyway, I don't want to go on too much about that, but we in a way we are all sickly and feeble. And as for the not having the moral courage to throw off the yoke of poverty and slavery, well, who knows what she could mean by that? What does she mean by have the courage to throw off poverty and slavery? Who was it? It wasn't Descartes. It was who was it? Oh, come on. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, I think he said, man is born free, yet everywhere is in chains, right? So yeah, Emma Goldman, like, I mean, like, we're never gonna throw those things off, right? Like, I mean, we're always gonna have that with us. It's part of being human, actually. We're always gonna suffer, and we're always gonna be enslaved to something or the other. Like I said, with antinatalism, it has to be absolute. It can't be conditional because suffering is absolute. I guess maybe one day in the future there could be people that we could create a breed of human beings who don't have consciousness, but would you even call that human being to begin with, right? So we would be these like flesh machines that can talk and like almost like AI these days, right? It can talk, it can look around, it can react to the environment, it can grow, it could reproduce, but it's not really alive inside. Like it doesn't know it's alive. It's just a machine, right? So is if that's the kind of future you want, then I guess maybe, hey, let's keep breeding until we could do that, right? But I mean, until then, we're just going to be conscious and we're going to be very aware of our uncomfortable existences, right? Our suffering. So yeah, we won't get rid of that. And even if we get to a point where we could get rid of consciousness, like that's like what, thousands of years down the road. Yeah, in the meantime, there's just going to be like an infinite amount of people being born that have to suffer through life just to get to that point where we gut ourselves of consciousness, the thing that makes us alive almost, right? So I mean, yeah, so it would be an interesting endeavor to try to get rid of consciousness. Now, as for capitalism, I think that capitalism is great. I think as much as people are going to keep pumping them out, I think capitalism is a good way of encouraging innovation, of encouraging solutions at scale. I think it's a great way. I think it's a proven way. There's contemporary distortions of capitalism. So, things like antitrust law and social media and, cultural effects of social media, misinformation, disinformation. I think all these things are distortions of capitalism. The centrality of currency or money. I think that's another distortion of capitalism. And maybe I'm wrong in saying that they're distortions. It's just naturally how capitalism will become, given any little lab experiment you run with it. But I think capitalism in its purest form is very useful. But that's maybe that's a different video that I make one day. But yeah, it's very useful for scale. But I think we could adapt it as we've carelessly adapted it to scale. I think we could adapt it in a very focused way to the winding down of the human race. I think we could use innovation and technology and the consumerist side of those things to wind ourselves down. As Les Unite says, economics, it's a man-made thing. So if it works at scale, we could also make it work for us as we slowly disappear from the earth. If everybody were to be antinatalist at once, right? So yeah, these things could work. What else? So capitalism, indiscriminate breeding. Okay, you know what? I think I'm good there. So I'm just gonna leave it there. Okay. Yeah, that's about all. Okay, bye.